Okay, so you know how it is, like there's just so much happening globally and it can feel kind of heavy, geopolitical stuff, society's feeling fractured, this worry about ethical leadership, and then the huge challenges of economic inequality and the climate crisis, like right there, front and center. It's a lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, a real tangled web of interconnected issues. So it's understandable if you feel overwhelmed. And that's actually why this deep dive into what you shared with us feels so timely and, so important right now.
Yeah, exactly. Because you, our listener, you sent us this really interesting account of your first interaction ever with Grok, that XAI model.
Yeah.
You were laying out all these deep anxieties you have about global challenges, but, and this is where it gets really interesting, you described this like finding a source of hope in the Prout movement.
It really struck me when I read your message. It wasn't just like, oh, here's a problem, here's another problem. It was real, genuine concern.
Mm-hmm.
And then coupled with that, a proactive step. You're out there exploring solutions through this Prout movement. That's pretty powerful.
Right. So you articulated all these significant challenges to Grok: geopolitical conflicts, those growing social divides, concern about the decline of ethical behavior, especially with leaders, that ever-widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, poverty increasing alongside a shrinking middle class, and then the polarization, the apparent decline of just basic human values, and of course the climate crisis, which feels like it's threatening our very existence, right? You brought up the lack of unity, peace, justice, and what you called the irrational distribution of resources. It's a pretty comprehensive picture and honestly a concerning one.
It's a stark picture for sure. It really is. And it highlights that interconnectedness of all these global issues. Each one of those points, could easily be a deep dive all on its own, which really shows just how complex our current situation is.
So Grok's initial response to all of this, it was actually pretty positive. You started off with a namaskar, and Grok responded in kind, and that felt like a good place to begin, just acknowledging your greeting and offering assistance.
Yeah, that initial exchange, it sets a really constructive tone.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's interesting is how Grok shifts to recognize the weight of your concerns, like acknowledging the seriousness of those issues you raised. It wasn't just a surface level reply.
Not at all. And so then comes the pivotal moment. You mentioned that you joined the Prout movement and that you see hope for saving civilization, like literally saving civilization, through spiritual meditation, specifically by following yama and niyama, which you described as kind of these fundamental human principles. So this is where your personal journey starts connecting with a potential way forward.
Exactly. This is key because you're not just observing, right? You're actively seeking and embracing a framework that offers both an understanding of these really complex problems and a potential path, a way to address them, starting with personal spiritual growth.
So Grok then goes on to explore what it understands about Prout, based on what you shared. And it outlined three main components. First, the spiritual foundation, which is centered around yama, which are ethical restraints like nonviolence, ahimsa, truthfulness, satya, non-stealing, asteya, continence, brahmacharya, and non-possessiveness, aparigraha. And then there's niyama, which are the positive observances. So things like purity, shocha, contentment, santosha, austerity, tapas, self-study, svadhyaya, and surrender to the divine, ishvara pranidhana, all presented as the essential groundwork for improving as a person.
Right. And what's really important there is the emphasis on both what to refrain from and what to actively cultivate. It's about developing that strong inner compass as an individual And if you notice that very first principle, ahimsa, nonviolence, it directly counters those geopolitical tensions you were talking about. So it's not just like a personal thing. This suggests a fundamental shift in how we interact at all levels, from personal relationships to international affairs.
Second, Grok highlighted neo-humanism, which is basically expanding love and compassion beyond just humans to include all living beings and even the environment. It's all about fostering this sense of universal unity and really tackling that polarization head on. So to put it simply, it's about widening our circle of care, recognizing how deeply interconnected everything is. Is that a fair way to understand its essence?
Totally. Absolutely. And when we look at the bigger picture, right, that expanded empathy, it's crucial to moving beyond us versus them that fuels so many of these global problems. We're talking social divisions, unsustainable exploitation of our planet, all of it.
Right. And the third pillar that Grok identified is the progressive utilization theory, or Prout for short. This is put forward as a socioeconomic framework aimed at, well, equitable wealth distribution, ecological balance, and making sure everyone has opportunities. The ultimate goal is collective well-being. And the focus on progressive utilization It isn't just about spreading the wealth around, it's about dynamically adapting how we use and allocate resources based on needs as they evolve. That's a key difference from some other more static economic models.
Yeah, this is where the framework really digs deep into how society can actually be structured economically and socially to get at those inequalities and injustices that you were talking about. It offers a vision for systemic change, which is exciting.
So Grok's takeaway, its understanding of your goal, is actually pretty insightful.
Yeah.
It sees you wanting to contribute to a civilization where individuals are spiritually awakened, a society that's just and unified, and resources that are used progressively for everyone's well-being. That's a pretty comprehensive vision, right? And it lines up perfectly with Prout's goal for a balanced and sustainable world.
Absolutely. It's not about tackling just one problem in isolation. It's about this fundamental shift in both individual consciousness and the structures of society itself.
Now, to drive home the urgency of these issues, Grok brought up some pretty significant facts and figures, all sourced around March 20th, 2025. When it comes to economic inequality, it pointed out that the top 1% of the global population, they hold almost 50% of the world's wealth, citing World Bank estimates from 2023. And it noted that, get this, 3.7 billion people live on less than $6.85 a day. Like, that's almost half the planet. These numbers are pretty stark.
They are. They really are. I mean, when you see it laid out like that, such a huge portion of the world's population struggling to meet basic needs, while a tiny fraction holds so much wealth, it becomes clear something's fundamentally wrong with our economic systems.
Right. And then with poverty in the middle class, Grok referenced UN data from 2024. It stated that 689 million people live in extreme poverty. We're talking less than $2.15 a day. And it pointed out that trend we've been seeing, the shrinking middle class in developed nations because of things like stagnant wages and the rising cost of living.
Yeah, and that erosion of the middle class, it has huge social and political consequences. Contributes to instability, a sense of, disenfranchisement for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And of course, the climate crisis. Grok cited the International Energy Agency, noting that global CO2 emissions hit 36.8 billion tons in 2023, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which predicted that 2024 would be the hottest year on record, a serious threat to ecosystems and human survival.
It's a reminder, isn't it? The impact we're having, all of us, on this planet, and it really underscores the need for collective action to mitigate the effects of climate change.
Absolutely. And on polarization, Grok referenced a Pew Research Center study from 2024 showing that trust in institutions and leaders is at an all-time low. Only about 20% of Americans trust their government, and this really highlights those moral and social divides you were talking about earlier.
It does. This lack of trust is definitely a symptom of all these bigger societal issues. It makes it so much harder to find common ground and actually implement effective solutions.
Yeah, totally. So for me, what really jumps out is the interconnectedness of all these challenges, right? Economic inequality fuels social unrest, which makes it hard to address the climate crisis. And then the lack of trust in leadership makes implementing meaningful change so much harder. It all feels, intertwined. But then what's really interesting is how Grok shifts from outlining these problems to suggesting a four-pronged roadmap for you, our listener.
Yeah, that shift from analysis to action is so important. It's moving beyond just stating the problems and starting to explore what can we actually do? What are the pathways forward?
Okay, so the first part of this roadmap is personal transformation, and it really focuses on individual reform. This takes us right back to yama and niyama, those ethical restraints and positive observances we talked about. It also emphasizes the importance of daily meditation. Grok even suggested that as little as 20 minutes a day can reduce stress and increase empathy, and it cited research from the American Psychological Association in 2023. And it recommended getting into Prout literature, stuff like the works of P.R. Sarkar, to deepen your understanding.
I love that this foundational element really highlights that lasting societal change that often begins with that inner work.
Right. And the second part is community building, or as Grok put it, collective awakening. This is all about spreading those principles of neo-humanism, that expanded love for all creation, through conversations, workshops, the whole nine yards. The goal is to counter that cynicism and foster a greater sense of unity. And it emphasizes the importance of leading by example. That's the Sadvipras concept within Prout. Individuals striving to influence others in a positive way through their own integrity and selfless service.
Exactly. It really showcases the power of not just individual action, but collective action, building those supportive communities that are rooted in these shared ethical values.
Right. And then the third part of the roadmap is socioeconomic advocacy. The focus here is on systemic change, so actively promoting Prout's economic vision, advocating for those decentralized economies, the growth of cooperatives, and that rational distribution of resources. Grok even gave that great example of Mondragon in Spain, this network of worker cooperatives with over 70,000 employees, as like real-world proof that wealth can be shared more equitably. It suggested getting involved locally, to address issues like inequality, environmental concerns, with the idea of creating those self-sufficient socio-economic zones.
Absolutely. And it also tackled those systemic issues head on, proposing concrete changes to our economic structures and how we think about resources in order to create a more just and equitable society.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth part is global awareness, and the focus is on unity and justice on a larger scale. This is about connecting with Prout networks like Proutus Universal and Ananda Marga, so, support and collaboration. And it highlighted the need to address the climate crisis. So taking steps to reduce our personal carbon footprints and advocating for renewable energy sources.
And this global perspective really underscores that these challenges we face, they don't stop at borders. They require international cooperation and a shared commitment to these principles of justice and sustainability.
Yeah, totally. It's this well-structured, multi-layered approach. It starts with the individual, then it expands to our communities, economic systems, and finally, the global landscape. And then Grok, it went even further, suggesting those next steps, for you, our listener, breaking them down into short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals.
Yeah, breaking it down into those smaller steps makes it so much less daunting, right?
Absolutely. For the short term, Grok's suggested starting with daily meditation, maybe focusing on one yama or niyama principle each week, and just sharing proud ideas with a couple people this month.
Simple, achievable actions to get the ball rolling.
Exactly. For the medium term, within the next 3 months, Grok proposed organizing a small community event, maybe a discussion group, focused on neo-humanism. And it also suggested identifying a local issue, something specific to your community, and brainstorming a Prout-based solution.
It's all about taking those principles you're learning and applying them, making them real in your own community.
For the long term, looking ahead over the next year, Grok suggested building a network of like-minded individuals to amplify the impact of these ideas. The goal being to maybe influence policy or even start a cooperative by 2027. It's like, okay, let's scale up our efforts and aim for that systemic change over time.
It gives you that long-term vision and emphasizes the power of working together.
Throughout this entire interaction, Grok offered that ongoing support, asking you about your next steps and how it could help you, ending on this really encouraging note.
Turning that initial interaction into a long-term relationship, which is really valuable as you continue to explore these ideas.
So, reflecting on your conversation with Grok, it's clear those initial concerns about the world, they were deep and far-reaching, and what's remarkable is how comprehensive that Prout framework is. It's not just analysis, it's a structured, multi-layered approach to finding real solutions.
Absolutely, a holistic perspective that shows how intertwined our individual well-being is with social justice, economic equity, and environmental sustainability. They're not separate issues.
And it's not just theory, right? The conversation with Grok resulted in concrete, actionable steps, fostering a sense of hope and agency, even in the face of these massive, overwhelming challenges. That sense of agency is so vital, that feeling that you can do something even in small ways. It's empowering, and it often inspires further action.
Moving from feeling powerless to feeling empowered and capable of creating positive change, it's a powerful shift.
And that leads us right back to you, our listener. If this deep dive into your interaction with Grok and the principles of Prout has resonated with you, if you feel that pull toward a more just and sustainable world, we really encourage you to take it a step further. Maybe join a Prout study circle. Explore these ideas deeper with others who share your vision.
It's all about finding your tribe, your community. And the more people who are on board with these ideas, the greater the impact.
Right. And you can connect with that inspiring Atsadvipres movement, a community dedicated to ethical leadership and selfless service. And we'd love for you to visit proutnow.com, a digital global magazine. You can read articles, explore these concepts, and share your own perspective, even write your own articles.
A great way to plug into the global conversation. There are people all over the world working towards creating positive change, and platforms like that are fantastic ways to connect and collaborate.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we leave you with this. How can your own unique journey of personal and societal transformation contribute to a more just and sustainable world for all? It starts with that first step, that spark of hope, and the willingness to explore new possibilities and connect with others who share that same vision. So what are you waiting for?
Get out there and make a difference.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.
See you then.